That was easy.
Okay. All right, so any last questions? Did you all, I know it's very early for all of you, see the email I sent just with a bit of detail? So I sent everyone a copy of everyone's presentation in case anyone has troubles loading it. And also it's just detailing that I think we just do the presentations in the order that Sophie outlined, which is Wendy, Sophie S, Kate, Ned and Sophie W. And then after that, I'll try and run the polls. And then after that, I'll be checking in the Q&A part where people can put in questions. And maybe I'll say that at the beginning. And if there isn't any, then I'll ask the couple, one to Kate and one to Sophie W, just to fill in a bit of time. And Ned, the multiple choice poll question for that Sophie S has put in is very similar to yours, so I can sort of ask you both to comment about that. I guess we're just going to have to see how time goes.
Do we know how many people are attending?
I did ask that. Apparently people didn't have to sort of specifically register, so they were saying anywhere between 60 and 100 possibly. So we won't see that until Ebony opens it up, which I guess we should look at doing.
Are you ready to go? We can do a countdown.
Are you guys ready?
Yeah, sure.
All right, we'll go in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We are preparing to go live.
Yeah, just can't see anyone else in the participants yet. Yeah, just can't see anyone else in. Maybe it was too early in the morning for everyone.
I think it might still take a few minutes before they drop in.
Okay. I might just share my screen, which has got my opening presentation. But then I guess I won't be able to see anything more than your pictures, so I won't be able to actually see if people have joined. So maybe if you can just let me know.
Absolutely. And just to mention really quickly, Wendy, I think you did the right thing. You don't have to prioritize to ask me that question if there are other questions.
Yeah, okay. Thanks, Sophie. So have we got anyone else joined yet?
No, not yet.
Okay.
But I think, well, except knowing if he's going to be specifically on time, I know that Susanna told me that she was going to join this session.
Okay.
She said
so
so
I guess
yesterday, and because she still hasn't, and she's normally always on time, I don't know whether or not it actually there's actually a minute or two overlaps before the participants. Perhaps we could ask the HTI Secretariat if they know.
If there's an overlap. What were you meaning, Sophie? Sorry.
Yeah, if there is some type of delay between the time that we actually go live until participants are let in, so to speak.
Oh, I understand the question. No, we are live right now. We are live and streaming, and it is accessible.
Oh, okay. So
There is a delay, however, it's only about 4 seconds. So I really should have given a 10-second countdown. So
okay.
no, we are live.
Okay, so then what's your advice to us if there are no participants? At what time should we still begin? Because I assume this is being recorded.
Yes, it is being recorded, and it will be made available after the fact. If you agree, I believe there's a consent from the panelists involved in that. But just so you know, it is being recorded, and it will be shown. So it's up to you.
Okay, so maybe can I suggest we give people 5 minutes, which is another 2 minutes. And then if people, then we just start regardless of how many or any of the people have joined, okay?
Sounds good. Hang on, Wendy, just to let you know, I received a text message from Susanna and she says she's logged in. So maybe because we are in the Zoom space, we don't see participants, but they are in fact there.
Oh, Ebony, can you answer Sophie's query on that?
I am showing 6 participants right now. So I believe that is that all of us?
Okay, all right, so perhaps we'll start then. So welcome everyone to this panel session on Patients at the Heart of Innovation, Strengthening Patient Voices in HTA Publishing. My name's Wendy Babbage. I'm the Editor-in-Chief of ISHTAC, a journal published by Cambridge University Press, but also the Journal of HTAI. And I also have a role as a General Manager at the Royal Australasian College of Surgeons. So the outline of this session is that initially I will give a brief description on the special collection that was done for ISHTAC, published earlier this year, on patient and public involvement in HTA. And then Sophie will give her presentation on the evidence perspective, Catherine on the patient perspective, Ned on the journal perspective, and Sophie Becker on the editor's perspective. And at the beginning, I will just give this brief outline of ISHTAC. So as I said, the Journal of HTA, we publish articles on a range of different topics related to HTAA, not just assessment, but also methods or policies. And also we publish commentaries and perspectives. But very importantly, also we publish on other areas that are very key components to HTA, such as ethics and patient and citizen involvement. So just an overview of how the journal roles work. We have an editorial board that oversee the journal and provide direction to me in my role as editor-in-chief. Then we have a range of editors. We have 4 deputy editors and quite a number of associate editors that work with me, as well as a peer review manager. Now, the peer review manager, Tracy, she checks all of the articles and documents and also provides a place where authors can ask queries. Then we have the associate editors. As I said, we have many associate editors, but in particular for this special collection, both Sophie and Sophie were the associate editors managing that. We also have a social media manager for Ishak, which is Tammy Clifford, who is one of the deputy editors. And then for articles, once they're published, that's done through our publishing and production editor, where articles are copy edited, typeset, and then published. So just some key points about Ishak. So as of this year, it became a continuous publication journal, meaning that there was not issues that were compiled. Instead of having a preprint and then compiling into issues, then the articles were actually published, and then to form the special collection, they're collated together, and you'll be able to see them on Ishtak's website. Just some metrics. Our time to decision, first decision, is down to about 1 month now. We have about a 40% acceptance rate. Each year we produce an annual supplement of the abstracts for the HTA meeting. And then, as I said, we have what used to be called themed issues, but are now special collections like the one that I'm talking about. And this is just showing the call that went out for authors to consider preparing articles and submit to Sophie and Sophie for the purpose of this special collection in Ishtak. So the outcome of this call was that there was 32 abstracts submitted, 24 abstracts were accepted, and there was also an editorial by Sophie and Sophie, and 2 letters of support, one from NICE and another from Eric Lowe Consulting. And that formed the special collection. So this is the link which we can share later if people would like, but if you go to the Ishtak website, you'll quite clearly be able to see this special issue. The articles, because obviously they're not all published at once in this schema, so they were published between August last year and April this year. And I'm pleased to say the downloads per article were really quite amazing. The range per article was 115 to one article that was 1,319. So that gives an average of 500 downloads per article. And compared to other articles that were published about the same time, that was 188. And also since April, it's been over 10% of all Ishtak articles that have been downloaded from this special collection. The social media, Tammy Clifford's provided me this information. So there was some social media on this special collection when it was released in April this year, resulting in over 8,000 impressions and nearly 300 total engagements. And she's indicated that's 5 to 6 times higher than with other recently published articles. Also looking at altmetric scores, there's a number of articles in the special collection that were in the top 25% of outputs scored by altmetric. So this special collection not only has all of those things to boast, but also that it's the largest ever published by Ishtak. And as I said, has had this huge social media attention, which is fabulous. So I'd like to really congratulate Sophie and Sophie on leading this excellent publication. So now I will pass over to Sophie to share her slides and present them, please.
Thank you, Wendy. And great to hear that all of that data on the special issue. So thank you very much, everyone, for attending. My name is Sophie Staniszewska. I'm a professor of patient and public involvement and experiences at Warwick Medical School. And I'm going to be addressing the role of evidence in strengthening the patient and citizen voice in publishing. Really important area for us to consider, because it is the bedrock of what we publish. And there are a number of issues, I think, that particularly through the special issue, myself and Sophie Verker and others who published considered. So I'm going to give you a whistle-stop tour of what some of those issues are. So first of all, in terms of thinking about the nature of evidence, one of the key aspects that we need to consider is the role of patients and citizens as definers of evidence. So we have a long history of creating evidence for HTA, and there are many excellent studies, many different concepts that underpin what we do. But we feel we've come to a point where it is important to review progress and consider the nature and the type of evidence we create and publish. In our paper, in the special issue Wendy's just talked about, we very much argued that we need a new paradigm for HTA evidence. And in the paper that Sophie and I wrote, which built on the book that Karen Facey and colleagues led, we made this case for this concept of patient-based evidence. And patient-based evidence for us is very much about experiential forms of evidence. It's attitudinal. It can include patient experiences studies. It can include quality of life studies, perceptions, attitudes, all of that information, which is about how someone experiences care, how someone experiences their life, their health condition, is all part of a very significant body of thinking. And for us, it very much addresses questions of acceptability, appropriateness, and effectiveness. So a patient might say, does this intervention work for me? Is it okay for me? Is it acceptable? Is it appropriate? Really, really important questions that aren't always addressed by studies that might look at particular outcomes and not consider the sort of patient perspective. So for us, this concept of patient-based evidence sits alongside the more usual forms of evidence that we're perhaps more used to, the clinical, the economic forms of evidence that are really important. And of course, we can't lose, they're vital. But it is another concept that we felt summarised the sort of evidence that we're interested in to form those assessments. And for us, I think to bring that body of work together, to bring those thoughts together, we need to think about how we develop this as an area. It is quite disparate. There are many different sorts of evidence in this, but we need to think about how we work together to create the concepts and the methods that support patient-based evidence. And importantly, the role of patients and citizens in that process as well. So I think in a way it is a bit of a challenge to the HTA world that we need to move our thinking on in terms of the nature of evidence. And of course, when we're thinking about the nature of evidence, we also need to think about who creates that, who produces this evidence. And this idea of patients as co-producers of evidence has come through very strongly, both in the international literature and certainly in the UK setting. Co-production is our core concept at the moment. So we need to think about how we work with patients, public, citizens to identify research questions for HTA, to make sure that we're thinking about their relevance, how we're co-producing decisions in the research process. And it might be about methods, it might be about how we work together to synthesize and interpret data. So that whole area of co-producing evidence, not just in showing people what you've done at the end of a research process, is something which has become really, really important. And how you implement that is still a challenge for us, and people have made lots of progress, but I think in HTA the concept of co-production could really help reorientate some of the thinking. We've also seen, in terms of evidence creation and patients' role, this idea of patients as co-developers of methods and methodological concepts that support patient-based evidence. So we've seen a lot of involvement in the content of HTA. So it might be about a particular experience or a particular aspect of quality of life, much less of a tradition around involvement in the development of methods and concepts. And this is such an important area for us because in a way what we're doing is potentially unraveling a method, reviewing it, trying to think what is the patient role within its creation, and the way that it might be used. And then we're effectively offering that back to the community. So for an example of a project, we've recently completed one looking at public involvement in mathematical and economic modelling. And so for that project, we worked with a public reference group, and we explored the roles at different stages of the modelling process. And together we developed a framework that is a methods framework. And that is something that the community can now use in thinking through what public involvement in modelling looks like. And that's an example of a very complex hidden area that I think we can really explore in the future. And I think some of that is transferable to other complex areas. So that's what I mean by methods and concepts. But we've also seen an evolution of patients as leaders in evidence creation. So us academics often hang on to our evidence creation, but patients are becoming leaders in this area. And I think even though that's still relatively rare, it is growing, and the field of user-led research has developed really powerful arguments for why this is really important. And HTA could explore in the future what that looks like in terms of patient leadership. But we've also seen patients as sources of data in studies, really important, and not always thought about in the world of involvement, because that's about participation as subjects in studies. But increasingly, I think it is connected much more with engagement and involvement. And it's important because patients' voices in the data collection provide really valuable information. And I think, it's important for us to be aware of what that looks like and what might be missing as well. So patients as sources of data and evidence creation is really key. And then something that we'll touch on during this presentation is then how we take that role in evidence creation, think about the patient role in publication as well as co-authors on papers, particularly if they've been involved all the way through and have made really important contributions. And we'll come back to that because it is an area where I think we need to develop further. And then patients and citizens as reporters of evidence, having done all of this work, been involved in the studies for HTA, been involved in creating concepts and methods, we need to make sure that the patient contribution is really clear. It's very easy to do a piece of work and then not report what the public involvement looked like. Importantly, we also need to report it at the right level so that there's enough room, for example, in papers to report, maybe it's qualitative data, in the right level of detail that we require, and in terms of the involvement in creating that. So we need to think about things like what level of reporting is right, and to be able to support that in publishing. And the GRIP 2, which is our guidance for reporting patient and public involvement, is a Equator guidance that aims to create consistency and transparency in reporting. The other aspect of this, of course, is considering the patient and the researcher forms of reporting. We're very aware that GRIP 2 is produced in an academic context, and we need to think more about what do patients want to report about their involvement, and how do we demonstrate that within the paper. And then finally on this slide, considering the patient voice in other forms of evidence, so the clinical and economic forms of evidence. For example, we see increasing interest in public involvement in health economics, so being able to report that well. And we know that there is an update of the CHEERS health economic evaluation checklist underway, which will help with that, I think. So those are really, really quite key elements for us to think about. So finally, for me, patients and citizens as positive disruptors. So to enhance the patient and citizen voice in publishing, we need to really be honest with ourselves about the status of involvement, and for the world of publishing to respond accordingly. And I think it's probably got to be more supportive than less. We know that this form of involvement can still sit outside HTA activity. And by that, I mean the power isn't always apparent in terms of decision making. It can still sometimes be seen as an add-on. So, how can we embed it within publishing to help support this movement really, and this area of practice. And I think that we'll have lots of ideas today about how we can do that. And as a research and publishing community, because we're both, often we're one and the same, we need to agree maybe some activities that can help with this paradigm change. So we've got patient-based evidence and the patient voice sitting alongside clinical and economic forms of evidence, and absolutely produced with strong patient and citizen involvement. So I will end there. Thank you very much for listening.
Thanks very much, Sophie. So now, Catherine, are you able to load your slides and do your presentation, please?
Okay, well, hello everybody. I'll just go back to the start. So today, just to give you a little bit of context of where I'm coming from, I'm a nurse and a researcher and work at the Centre for Community Driven Research. So we work across a number of different countries across 3 core programs. The first is building a public repository of patient experience data, so patient and carer personal experience. The second is working with patient groups to develop networks so that we can support patient organisations in their role as part of the health system. And finally, we look at different ways to test different approaches to community engagement, but also community-based care. So the first thing I'm going to talk about today, I'm going to try and bring it always back to the patient and carer perspective, and probably weave in a little bit of the nurse perspective as well. So one of the programs that I run is called Patient Pathways, and it's 12 nurses working in different patient organisations to help patients develop care plans and access the health system. My particular clinical area is rare and genetic and complex disease. So the patients that come into our service often have a rare mutation or a rare genetic disease, or they might just have a lot of different complex comorbidities that they need some help to develop their care plan. So when patients come to us, they're often wanting to know what's new, what's emerging in research. And a lot of the time that we spend following up for the patients is looking at the literature to see, what's happening, what's coming through, what's new. And this is particularly important in rare and genetic disease. I spend a lot of my time with the rare disease patients looking at case reports and trying to explain to them what those case reports mean, how the information collected in rare disease is different to those diseases that have big populations as well. And I had an interesting experience recently where I had a patient come through, he'd had a case report written about them, and we actually went through that case report so that they could understand their condition better. So what we'd like to see in publications is not just lay summaries, but a lay version of publications, particularly where they have clinical significance for patient groups. This can become such an important source of information for patients. They're always looking for evidence-based information, and it's hard to keep up with that when you're developing patient information. But if we think about then the opportunity to use that in HTA, the earlier the patients are educated about the new research coming through and have the ability to keep up to date, the easier it will be at that point of HTA, where we're often trying to explain what new technologies or new treatments mean. Patients will already be well along the way to understanding that earlier. And I can't stress enough the importance of early intervention in the context of HTA. If we're always leaving community engagement to the point where it's reimbursement and there's a big rush to get patients engaged, it's already too late. So the second program that I'm going to talk a little bit about, and this was the focus of the publication within the series, is about data collection and patient experience reporting and evidence generation. So very much along the lines of what Sophie spoke about, is that third pillar of data that goes along the clinical and the economic data. So in the PEAK program, we've developed a mixed methodology protocol, qual and quant. Patients do an online questionnaire as well as a structured interview. And I think this is something that we need to look at a lot more, particularly in the context of HTA, is the use of qualitative methodology and how we interpret qualitative data. So what we've done, the way that we went around developing the protocol, it took around 2 years to get it just right. We actually started by asking a very open question to a lot of different patients, is simply explain to us your condition, everything that you've gone through. And what that did was help us understand how patients naturally talk about their condition and their experience. From that, we were able to then pull out what are the different domains that patients want to talk about and how do we need to ask questions back to them so that they can talk about their experience. So I guess the difference is often in HTA, we're asking what do we need to know as decision makers to make decisions about treatments and devices and health systems. What we were asking patients is, well, what do you want to tell us? And I think that's an open door. That's a door that we need to keep open for patients, is always allowing them to tell us what they need to tell us. So some of the reasons we found this approach really works is that we're creating a supportive environment. So all of the telephone interviews are done by a nurse or allied health professional so that the patients are supported throughout the process. And if at the end of the interview they need to be referred on to a health service, we can do that for them. So we're not just taking their information and saying, well, that's nice, sorry you had all those problems, and then off we go. We're trying to then refer them into the health system. It's holistic evidence, so it covers this range of domains, which means that it's not just being used for HTA, it has multiple uses. And I think this is a big thing we need to think about, is if we're collecting information, if we're collecting data, we need to make sure that we're using it as much as we can so that the time that we're respecting the time that patients give to us. Accessible results, so every study we do is put on a platform like the one you can see on the screen, and it's accessible to everyone. So our idea is that more and more reports we can do, people working in the system, in health systems across the world, can access this information. So you can be sitting at your desk and thinking, I wonder what the information preferences for people with breast cancer are, or with SMA. You can go in and you can access that information, and that can be then used to inform the way you approach your work. So in that sense, that's how we're trying to drive a more patient-centric health system across different services. It's equitable, so anyone can access, anyone can come to us and be interviewed and complete the questionnaire. And this is really important for demographic balance, to make sure, you know, it's everyday people that are participating in these studies, not only people that are advocates, but just everyday people, getting demographic balance from different, you know, geographic areas, from socioeconomic areas, so that we know it's a balanced report at the end. And this is really important also for rare and poor prognostic diseases, where we really need to be able to listen to patients in their time rather than on our schedule. Importantly, it's proactive, so we're not leaving things too late. The information is there and it's accessible, so that we're not just leaving it to that endpoint of, you know, when it might be getting close in HTA to the reimbursement stage. We can be proactive and we're not having to chase our tail so much. And finally, we're building a system that makes data collection and evidence generation in this sense the norm. And it's building that infrastructure to do that. It's not an easy process. It's been a really hard process to do this systematically, but that's the infrastructure that we've been able to build. And something we don't often talk about in the health system is we talk about infrastructure for other things, but not necessarily infrastructure for routine collection of patient experience data. This is some feedback that one of the participants in a PEAK study gave, and I think it's really important for us to remember from a patient perspective, when you're giving feedback or when you're participating in studies, that it can be a traumatic experience. So we don't want to, you know, make patients relive that over and over and over again. And that's an important part, I think, of any process is thinking about how we look after patients when they are participating in these kind of studies. The last thing is more of a bit of a thought bubble for everyone to take away and think about perhaps over the next couple of months while you're developing your programs. And it's the ethics of patient engagement, particularly in HTA. So as a researcher, when I conduct a study, I have to get ethics approval, and there's lots of different things I need to think about. And one of those things is how, I report back to patients, what's my plan for dissemination of research? And that goes to the ethics committee to review. But if, as a researcher, again, if I want to collect patient information for the purpose of feedback in HTA, I don't necessarily have to do that. And it makes us kind of think about, well, should there be a framework for feedback in HTA and in the health system more broadly? Should we have a framework like we do for ethics, or even using that framework to say we do need a dissemination plan, and we do need to be able to have the feedback from the users of that data? We've put a lot of submissions into the HTA system about the patient experience, but we rarely get information back about how useful it's been, or what the outcome has been, or how the patient information has been used. And until we get that kind of information, not just us, but everybody, we actually have no way of measuring the impact of patient feedback in HTA. And I think that's it's probably something to think about, is when we're talking about best practice, will we ever know until we have that endpoint of, well, this is how your information was used? Finally, I just want to take a moment to say thank you, particularly to Wendy, who's doing such a fantastic job at the journal. It's such an important part of this society, such an important strategic part of this scientific society. And I just wanted to say thank you. Those numbers that you gave at the start were incredibly impressive. The 1 month turnaround is amazing, and you do such a great job. So I think from me and the other panelists, and also from my colleagues on the HTAI board, I just wanted to say a special thank you. And also Sophie and Sophie, congratulations on this wonderful issue. It's been a great success, and I think you've done a wonderful job. So thank you.
Thanks very much, Catherine. And thanks for the compliments. It's certainly been very much a team effort. And yeah, we have a very big team now of editors at the journal, and everyone's working together fantastically. So it's really pleasing. So thank you. Okay, now I'll hand over to Ned to give his presentation, please.
Yep, sure. Let me just turn it. Great. So hopefully everyone can see my screen now. That's great. So let me just organize things. Great. So hello, I'm Ned Wilson-Eames. I work for Cambridge University Press as an editor for a list of STM journals, including ISHTARC, which is the official journal of HTAI. So my role involves managing the logistics of actually publishing the journal as part of a larger publishing team, as well as working with Wendy on things like marketing, editorial development, and that sort of thing. So before specifically talking about patient involvement in the publishing process and my sort of perspective, I thought I'd quickly summarize the kind of roles and responsibilities of the publisher in journal publishing. So naturally, the main responsibility of the publisher is to publish the content of the journal. This also involves ensuring the permanent availability and preservation of scholarly research. We also handle the logistics of the process, including supporting peer review systems, production processes like copy editing, typesetting, maintaining websites, marketing, and everything like that. Another primary responsibility is making sure best publishing practices are upheld, including ethical policies, conflicts of interest, transparency, and how issues involving copyright plagiarism or that sort of thing are handled. And so thinking of the research process as a sort of whole, as a timeline, publishers are only involved sort of towards the end of the process. So once the research is funded and conducted and a paper written and ready for submission to a journal like IJTAC is when we sort of get involved. So with that in mind, I've been thinking about what publishers can do to promote patient engagement and involvement in medical publishing and in HTA. So talking about publishing policies and practices previously, I think publishers do have a role in adopting editorial policies and guidelines to promote patient voices and engagement. So for example, as Sophie was saying, well, guidelines around authorship and acknowledgement and ensuring patients are appropriately acknowledged or listed as co-authors when involved in research. Issuing public policies and statements is another thing publishers can do. So with the BMJ, for example, adopting a patient and public partnership strategy back in 2014, and they have a range of resources online. So that's one approach. Efforts might also include steps in the manuscript submission process, asking authors to confirm levels of patient or public involvement, which is useful in terms of kind of data that we can collect as publishers, and at least giving a kind of push to authors to consider their research from this perspective when submitting a manuscript. Another point from the publisher side is around access to published content and readability. So alongside things like plain language summaries, I'll be talking more about open access and sharing later. So I quickly wanted to mention some of the publishing process that affects or kind of involve patient involvement. So one part I've already alluded to is the appropriate acknowledgement of the contribution of patients or other partners in research. So from a publisher's side, this is increasingly important with the increased focus on openness and transparency around authorship and contributions. And publishers can also drive debate into current definitions of authorship. So for example, there's debate around how appropriate established systems for kind of measuring contributions and acknowledging things are for the contributions of patient partners. So these are things like the credit taxonomy or the ICMGE recommendations for authorship. And arguments are going on around whether these should be revised, and these are debates in which publishers will naturally be involved. Patient peer review is another policy that publishers can work with journals to implement. So peer review is in many ways the bedrock of journal publishing and ensuring the quality of published research, and has been historically quite slow to change or evolve. However, with efforts from the BMJ, as I mentioned previously, and journals like research involvement and engagement actively promoting patient involvement in the peer review process, awareness is growing. And publishers can engage with this by providing clear resources outlining what peer review process is, how to use systems, what the goal is, and what useful input patients can provide as readers and reviewers, and also actively encourage patients to register as reviewers if interested. So naturally, not all patients will want to be involved in the publication process or the review process, but I think it's really important for publishers and journals to have the policies, guidance, and systems in place to ensure that patient involvement is possible where the interest exists. So a more ambitious or sort of forward-looking debate in journals publishing involves rethinking the traditional idea of a peer-reviewed paper. So this is sort of what can we do alongside or in addition to the traditional journal article or book chapter, and towards something that may kind of help in making research more accessible to a wider range of readers. So this sort of debate falls under the umbrella of kind of big ideas that are often discussed and kind of brainstormed among publishers and researchers and others. But currently it's the case that the sort of abstract introduction, method, results, discussion research paper does remain the kind of lingua franca of academic research, and is very ingrained in systems like citations and impact factors and funding frameworks and things like that. So that is the case at the moment. However, publishers are kind of making efforts to innovate and develop new concepts in this sort of vein. So, for example, from Cambridge, we now have this product, I guess, called Elements, which are an effort to kind of combine the best features of books and journals, which we've published about 50 of now, I think. And there are new concepts under development, one goal of which is to try to better encompass the wider research ecosystem and processes rather than just the end product of a published paper. So my question to kind of everyone watching or everyone interested today would be, what do you feel publishers and journals can do to best promote and enable patient involvement in HTA and medical publishing? So any thoughts on this would be really useful to hear, so please do share them however you can. So moving on to the next part that I mentioned earlier, another aspect I wanted to discuss alongside involvement is more about access to published research. So historically, access to journals has been based on subscriptions, normally purchased by universities and research institutes and that kind of thing, and not often affordable to individuals. So access to published research output has often been difficult or expensive for readers without access to something like an institutional library. And this has the result that members of the public have not been easily able to access research, even despite indirectly funding a lot of the research through taxes that go towards funding higher education institutes and research grants. So from my point of view, working for a sort of medium-sized academic publisher, a kind of obvious and basic barrier to involvement in HTA medical publishing is the difficulty or cost involved in being able to just directly access and read the research that is being published. So the open access movement is a response to this. It's kind of the big debate and big change in publishing currently. It's a major and ongoing shift in a publishing model with the aim of making all research freely available to all readers. And it's been driven by things like the growth of online and the electronic access, the resultant quick global dissemination of research, and alongside a climate of increasing journal subscription prices and flattening or cuts to library budgets. It's a very big shift and still ongoing, and issues involved include how this sort of open access publishing model will be paid for and how the quality will be maintained. And answers so far have been coming from subscriptions being replaced by things like open access, kind of income from ABCs and other big models like Read and Publish that are coming in now. That's where essentially whole countries or territories make agreements with publishers to fund open access publishing for researchers working in their country. So this shift towards open access has accelerated massively even over the past few years as research funding bodies and national research councils have moved to mandate full open access for all published research. For Cambridge specifically, we've committed to a goal of transitioning all research journals that we publish to fully open access by 2025. And similar commitments have been made by a significant proportion of academic publishers. And for IJTARC specifically, along with all Cambridge journals that Cambridge publishes, IJTARC is now a transformative journal, to borrow a Coalition-esque sort of phrase. And this is a sort of a hybrid journal that is made a commitment to actively committed to eventually becoming fully open access. You can also see the organic growth of open access publishing in the journal in recent years in this chart on this slide, which shows the cumulative number of open access articles published in IJTARC over time from 2007 to 2020, and we've now published over 100 open access papers. And you'd see a similar chart across much of scientific publishing as a whole, with open access uptake increasing and accelerating rapidly. So To me, this is really positive. The more people that can read research is just the kind of the better, really. And the eventual move towards full open access effectively removes the historical barrier to readership faced by members of the public, including patients. And as I've said, this reflects the growing consensus that research and knowledge should be freely available to everyone. So alongside open access, Cambridge are also trying to make it as easy as possible for people to access research through kind of organic sharing. And just as an example of this, Cambridge have developed this tool allowing all authors or readers who have access to a paper to basically generate a link which leads to a free, fully readable version of the paper they want to share. And this can be shared with anyone, put on social media, anywhere on the internet, shared however you like, really. So this has opened up a good proportion of research that we publish as well. And so while full open access is the eventual goal, and I imagine should be happening in the relatively near future, through tools such as this, in the meantime, publishers have been and are actively trying to kind of remove barriers to access to research content where they may exist to interested readers. So to quickly summarize, I just want to kind of say that a range of voices in the publishing process will always, I think, be beneficial for journals and improve the quality of published work. So this should definitely be something to strive for. Publishers can work with journal editors like Wendy and the research community to adopt policies and practices that enable and raise awareness of the importance of patient and public engagement in publishing. And finally, access to published research is often challenging for those outside of academia, but a rapidly developing movement across journals publishing towards full open access will enable every person to access and read research output, which is especially valuable naturally for those involved in the research or affected by it. And that is the end of my presentation. So thanks very much for your time.
Thanks very much, Ned. Really helpful. There'll be a question for you a bit later, I see in the chat that Johnny Wells put in. So I'm not sure if you can see the portal, but at the end of all the presentations, we'll do some polling and then we'll go forward with the questions that the audience has put forward and have a few others if there's time for those. So Sophie Virko, now would you be able to share your presentation, please?
Yes, so thank you very much. My name is Sophie Virko. I work at SBU in Sweden, which is the Swedish Agency for Health Technology Assessment and Assessment of Social Services. I've been working there for many years, and for a long time, I led the work on patient engagement, and now I'm more devoted to our international work. But for today's session, I am giving you the editor perspective of this theme issue, and what is it like to be being an editor in action now. So we're getting down to the nitty-gritty works of it. How does it work in reality? It actually encloses a lot of practical work. So more about how to chase people around, how to invite them to provide papers for the theme issue, how to give them practical advice. Sophie and I had a lot of emails coming through asking for practical advice and deadlines and where to find this and that information. So a lot of that is enclosed in the daily work of the editor. The reason why we wanted to do this was because we felt that it is really important that we do publish papers on patient and public involvement to build the evidence base for this practice. And we, as you saw earlier in Wendy's presentation, she showed you the definitions that or the theme as we had defined it before it even existed in what we were asking for, what type of papers that we wanted to have. And of course, one of the main issues for us is really that we want the PPI papers to be robust, have a high quality, and report on public involvement to improve the area. And progress has been made, but improvements are still needed, we would say. Well, it is important also that there is clarity around the importance of publishing PPI papers for a journal. Specifically, you would want to see that both as an author, but also as a reader, we think. It's also important that there is clarity for which types of papers that can be published, depending on the type of study or activity, especially focusing on this area. Something we would like to see more of. Having done this, having now had the experience of going through this theme issue, is that we would like to see more of high quality PPI papers that are based on robust research. We would also like there to be more funding for this type of research studies to build the evidence base forward. And not only do we need the high quality on the actual PPI papers, but also on the reporting of impact of PPI. We also think that we would need more awareness of how a study contributes to the wider field. And for authors, finally, to build in a critical reflection of what they have done. This we feel sometimes is still lacking. Another issue we have been able to see, having done this particular theme issue, is what impact it has when you do have patients doing peer reviews. For each paper that was submitted, Sophie and I specifically went through assigning both academic peer reviewers as well as patient peer reviewers. And when you look at the type of review you get, these really do differ. And combining both or having several of them does really build for improving the quality of the papers. So what are our dreams as editors? Well, my wishes would be for higher quality public and patient involvement science based on robust methods, and studies that draw on the evidence then to support their PPI when they write it up. We would like to see better quality patient and public involvement practices based on evidence, and a higher degree of patient involvement in HTA, both regarding uptake and continuous development. Finally, I would like to add, because I do work at an agency and because I have, my agency has been highly involved with INADA, which is the International Network for Agencies that do health technology assessment. What I'm showing you here is really what the aim is within the network, what agencies are looking for, what does INADA want to provide for their agencies. And you can see here that along these lines, if you would take patient involvement only as the sole topic, we could add that in all of these different parts. So within INADA today, we have an active patient engagement learning group. This has been an asset when we have done this theme issue as well. Within INADA as well, people are interested. The agencies are looking at what other agencies are doing. And because we have been lucky and had a number of agencies publish in the theme issue about their work with patient involvement, and sometimes, but unfortunately to a very low degree, still having had patients as co-authors, we think this is something that needs to improve over time. This has also become now an asset for other agencies to find out what is it that others have done and how could we learn from that. So from the agency perspective, I would also like to actually thank the journal for giving Sophie and I the opportunity to do this theme issue, because I think you have actually provided a lot of benefits and win-win for the agencies. So thank you very much.
Right, thank you, Sophie. All right, well, that's been 4 very excellent presentations. To the participants online. So first off, I'd like to start by running just a few quick poll questions and ask you to respond. So we'll just quickly run these and then we can move on to your questions that you put onto the portal. It looks like the first, I'll just leave it a few more seconds. It clearly seems to be a yes, 83% yes. On should there be an ethical framework to guide how we feed back HTA results to patients? So thank you for responding to that one, 88% yes. Then the next one, just open that now. So when you publish an article, does your dissemination plan include dissemination to patient populations in understandable language? Maybe that's the end of the polling. So we have 71% yes for that one. And then the final poll is actually a multiple choice question, as in answers. So this will maybe take a little bit more time. So I'll start that now. Sharing the results. So what can the world of research and publishing do to support patient and citizen involvement in publishing? I think you can only probably select one of the options. Okay. Give it a few more seconds. Right, so it looks like I'll leave that open and just for those if they can't see the portal. So 33% support patient co-authors in papers and reports about HTA. 33% require clearer reporting of patient and citizen involvement in studies for HTA. 25% invest in research to create new concepts and methods that embed patient and citizen involvement, and 8% create greater clarity around patient co-authorship in relation to contribution. Great. So thank you very much for participating in that. Now we do have a number of questions that have come up in the Q&A. So maybe, so if we go back in sort of order of asking them. That may be tricky. Let's go with the one up the top. So we've got Johnny Well, how to facilitate issues around affiliation for patients and citizens. Now, Johnny, I'm not sure how we interact with you about this. Are you able to speak to clarify that? And then we can ask the panelists. Not sure. Ebony from HTAI, how do we interact with the participants with their questions? Is it only online?
Right, so the attendees will write in their questions and you can read out the question and answer them verbally.
Okay, all right. So who on the panel would like to take that first question? Thanks, Ebony. How to facilitate issues around affiliation for patients and citizens.
I can give it a shot. I'm not sure I quite understand the question, so I'll go in with my own interpretation. Is it affiliations, meaning, you know, if you're a patient representative of a group, or I'll take it as that there's an affiliation with a particular group. And I think any of those issues that might come with alliance to one particular advocacy route rather than the raw patient experience can always be overcome with good governance around terms of reference and transparency. So long as we're always transparent about the conditions in which patients are participating or have participated, I think that's the key, is so long as it's transparent and we can see where it's come from. That way, at the point of decision making, we know where the bias might be, or where we need to, you know, place that form of evidence as it comes in. It's not unlike any other form of evidence. We're always looking for, you know, if there's bias or if there's this or is that where funding has come from. It's exactly the same. We should treat this process in the same way.
Okay, thanks, Catherine. Now, Emily Holmes has written, what are the panel's thoughts on a requirement for lay abstracts in addition to scientific abstracts at the publication stage, as is mandatory at the funding stage? So Emily, I'm not sure, are you meaning, and maybe you can just write it in the questions, are you meaning that it would be a lay summary that would be published alongside the scientific abstract as part of the publication? Maybe if you can write that into the questions, I could ask Ned if he is aware of.
Sure, yeah, I think that sounds correct.
Interpreted that maybe.
I think your interpretation sounds correct of that, and yeah, I think this is really important. It's something we're seeing more and more of in journals, kind of adopting, as you say, Wendy, a kind of above the standard scientific abstract, a kind of plain language summary or lay summary. And if you browse around journals, you see more and more journals adopting this kind of approach. And especially for just marketing purposes and things like Twitter, and so engagement becoming more important, it just makes a lot of sense, as well as readability. So it is a thing that there's much more awareness of now. I don't think enough journals are doing it, but it's growing in the industry as something that we're asking authors to consider, or many journals are now requiring it, but I'd like to see more uptake of it, certainly.
Can I come in on that point as well, Wendy?
Yes, absolutely. So
just to say, our sort of sister journal, if you like, the Research Involvement and Engagement, we do require a plain language summary of the abstract as well. And my co-editor-in-chief, Richard Stevens, who is a patient, always sees it as a measure of success when the scientific one and the plain language one are the same. We feel we've cracked it then.
very good point. Yes, thank you. Another question from Johnny Whale. So you've mentioned, Catherine raises a really important question about ethics of patients being involved in HTA. And yeah, I totally agree, and very interested in your points about the ethics framework, Catherine. But then Jani's gone on to ask, could the journal offer a buddy for patients and citizens wanting to publish? So I'm not sure if this is, and again, it's difficult without being able to have a formal discussion with you, Yanni, but yeah, I assume you mean some kind of support from the editors at the journal in them preparing their articles. And from my perspective, and I'm sure all of our associate and deputy editors would be very happy to support patients in that. So I don't know if they're, yeah, I guess, Ned, we don't have a process or an avenue for providing that. Maybe that's something we could think about promoting. Ned, could you respond? Do you have any knowledge of that in other journals?
Yeah, absolutely. It's not something I don't think many of Cambridge's journals kind of have similar policies, but it's something we could definitely think about adding to the sort of information pages for the website, or kind of laying it out more explicitly. I know, as you say, the editorial team of Ishtag would kind of naturally be really happy and interested in doing this, but we don't have it's the lack of kind of explicit information about it that we could help with, certainly.
Thank you. And Sophie, with your journal, do you, I guess, do you have any views on this, or how do you do that in your journal?
I think it's in our journal, it's been a more informal buddying, because my co-editor-in-chief is a patient. He's often taken that role of mentoring people through the process, who you know, publishing websites can be a challenge to access and negotiate your way through. So I think there's been buddying in different ways. So patients who've published with us have buddied each other. But they've also sought advice from us as well. So I think because we have such a strong patient community on the editorial board and publishing with us, that's sort of evolved naturally. But I think that's a great idea.
Great, thank you very much. And finally, in Jani's comment is about the cost of publishing. So really not more, I guess, Ned, like you were talking about, access for publishing for patients and citizens being able to get access to the published articles. But what Jani's talked about is the fees for publishing is an issue. So I guess that's the cost of them then paying for open access. So do you have a comment that you could give about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So this ties in, as you say, with the movement towards open access, and then where the kind of how the funding works. And so currently for Easttalk, there are no fees to submit or publish in the journal, because it is still a subscription journal that does publish open access papers as well. But with this eventual move to full open access, how is that going to work exactly with people like patients or authors without funding? Essentially, this is one of the challenges of open access. We do have a kind of range of waivers and kind of discounts and things like that for anyone that can't, because we don't want payment to be a barrier to anyone really at any point. But it's just ironing out those processes and making kind of sure that people that want to publish can publish without the burden of funding where it isn't available. But it's just kind of making those agreements and formal processes in place to make sure that doesn't happen. At the moment, we're a bit in the in-between stage where things are essentially being worked out. But I'm confident that with this quick move to open access, there should not, but hopefully will not be barriers to publishing for anyone without funding. It's a big debate, though.
Okay, great. Ebony's letting us know we've only got 3 more minutes. So there is one more question here that I can put to the panel. So did the panel see the recent survey of medical journal editors-in-chief that showed that 31% do not view the inclusion of patient partners as authors on manuscripts as appropriate? Now, Sophie, I'm not sure if that's the one you shared with us just earlier. Can you just quickly comment on that before we finish the session?
Yeah, it was a paper we published in our journal. So yes, I think it shows the need for the world of publishing to, I guess, have a conversation about this, and to understand the role of patients and the public in publishing more extensively, and to really think about what the future looks like. and create that clarity. And I think in a way, it's like in many areas, we're moving from a very traditional academic model to one that is much more open and much more accessible and co-produced with our patients and publics. And I think publishing is one of those areas that, as Ned said, is slowly moving towards that. And I think articles like that just propel us forward in terms of, this is a discussion we need to have now as a community of what does that look like, what does contribution look like, and really move away from those very traditional academic ways of thinking about it. So we were very pleased to publish that, and I know it's generated a lot of discussion. So Ned, I'm relying on you to take that forward in the publishing world.
Absolutely.
Right. Well, I think we're just about at the end, so maybe we should sort of close off. But can I firstly thank the people who have attended, which I note in the comments that you were all attending, and most of the panelists, apart from me, at very difficult hours of the day. And so we very much appreciate you getting up very early in the morning to attend this panel. But I really would also like to thank the panelists who have done a wonderful job putting together what I think has been a really fascinating group of presentations. And thanks to everyone for their questions and responses, and to the polling as well. So thanks very much, and I think we'll end there.
Okay, the live streaming has stopped, so you know we can still be here, but the live streaming's gone.
Okay.
You're no longer live.
Thank you. I just thought before we all
Sorry, Wendy,
yeah.
you cut out on my computer, so I didn't hear we can end it there. So I didn't. So thank you for the chat, because you cut out here. So I apologize for that.
Could you
Okay,
just
no
also
worries.
stop the recording as well?